Welcome to Grow Law Firm Podcast. I have a terrific guest with me here today. Hugo Gomez of Abogados now is different from most other guests I had here. Hugo Gomez is a marketer, just like I am. I listened to somebody else's very popular podcast in the legal community a few months ago, and that's where I heard Hugo's voice for the first time. And I reached out to my team and I'm like, yeah, I gotta have this guy on my podcast. Hugo, it's such an honor to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me, Sasha.
So Hugo, your thing is that you guys do, you're a consulting company. You do not call yourself an ad company. You're a consulting company for law firms, working primarily with smaller law firms. I looked at the stats on your website. I believe 40% of your clients are solos.
Yeah.
And your thing is that you do all things advertising for Spanish-speaking market.
That's right. Yeah. The majority of attorneys that we work with depend on us to represent them online in Spanish, namely on mobile social media and mobile advertising.
Very interesting. Why mobile specifically?
Yeah. So when I started the company close to 6 years ago, one of the glaring opportunities that I saw was that the Hispanic market, according to the Nielsen media statistics, over indexes on mobile usage as their primary internet device, more so than the general market in the United States. So it's a very mobile first market. And we lead with that. Whenever we talk to an attorney about the market opportunity, oftentimes it's mistakenly diluted down to just the population increase. It's not just that; it's how this market interacts with the internet, and it's largely through mobile phones.
That makes perfect sense. And if my memory serves me right, I think about 1 out of 5 residents in the US speak Spanish, whether they were born here or born somewhere else. Like 20% or so speak Spanish, correct?
Yeah, that's right. It's about 1 out of 5 Hispanic origin, and that could be fully bilingual. That could be fully Spanish dominant. That could be English only with some degree of like Spanish familiarity. Yeah, it's going to become 40%. Hispanics are going to become 40% of the market by 2060, if I'm not mistaken. The numbers are pretty alarming in that for the first time, the white population decreased according to the U.S. Census. That's never happened before. So what we're seeing is a complete demographic change in the United States. And so what we're trying to educate attorneys on is that, in order to prepare for the future, you should address the realities of these demographic shifts.
That makes perfect sense. So 1 out of 5 people speak Spanish. Here's what I was always curious about. And we do marketing, but the way that we do marketing to Spanish community, the Spanish speaking community, is very primitive. We translate the things that we've written in English into Spanish.
Yeah.
That's the extent of it because our agency are not specialists at what you do.
Yeah.
We do not have the same capabilities as what you have. I find it very interesting. So I came to this country from Russia, of all places, 30 years ago. And the high school that I went to it was a very, very diverse neighborhood where I was at. There were plenty of kids there that were born here, but they were very bilingual in both Spanish and English. I'm curious, this is 30 years from that point now.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are millions or tens of millions of people who are fluent in both languages. When it comes to advertising for that specific segment, and I believe it's a very large segment
Yeah.
of Spanish speaking population, do they care to interact with lawyer advertising in Spanish, English, or is it irrelevant to them?
It's sort of, I mean, it depends, right? I think it comes down to how long you've been into the country. At least that's what our data suggests. That the newer you are into the country as a Hispanic person, it's more likely that you're going to be a little more receptive to Spanish language marketing. But as you assimilate more, as English may or may not become a better part of your daily language usage, you might be more receptive to searching for help in English than it is in Spanish. It really depends. We've seen it. It depends on how long you've been in the country in terms of the data that we've seen.
Got it. That makes sense. Let's make some generalizations.
Sure.
When we think about advertising legal services, there are a number of practices or subsegments there. Which segments, and I know that you work across all of those, But
Right.
which segments do better and which segments do worse if you look at the same geo markets?
Yeah. So in terms of practice area, is that right?
Correct, yes.
Yeah. Well, generally speaking, the Hispanic market is especially in the immigrant market, um, largely working class. So issues that affect blue collar workers will more than likely be more attractive to rather issues that affect blue collar workers will result in more cases for attorneys like those that work in labor law for wage and hour disputes or workers' compensation for work injury issues. However, on the flip side, what we're seeing now is that multi generationally, Hispanics are now passing down assets, homes, businesses. So estate planning has become quite new in the Hispanic market in the last 10 or 15 years, and that it continues to grow. So it's not necessarily that there's only one area of law that is most likely to get more clients within the Hispanic community. We're seeing it across the board. Business ownership, formations, estate law, probate, obviously injury accidents, work accidents, virtually all the issues that generally the majority of the country interface with. We're seeing across the board similar distributions within the Hispanic community.
Very interesting. So let's picture a scenario. You
Mhm.
work with so many law firms. And I love it that you have an FAQ section on your website. I went through all of those questions and answers. And
Thank you.
absolutely, I think it's very helpful. Like to me, prior to the interview, when I was looking up information about you, and to somebody who may be considering hiring you, one of the frequently asked questions that's posted on your website is, "What if I, pretending that I'm a law firm owner or an attorney, what if I don't speak Spanish?" I don't know the statistics, but I assume that a good percentage of law firms do have Spanish speaking attorneys and support staff, and even a higher percentage of law firms do not have Spanish speaking attorney or support staff. Let's picture a scenario that you're an employment law firm. You're based here in Chicago, where I am.
Mhm.
I do not know the percentage of population here that speaks Spanish, but I know it's high. It's
Yeah,
very high, right? So it's probably 15, 20, 25% in Chicago speak Spanish.
for sure.
So, and we do not have paralegals. We do not have intake specialists. We do not have lawyers who speak Spanish. But we're seeing that our competitors who do are increasing case flow while ours is stagnating or decreasing. What can you do for us? How would you help us out?
Yeah, so the majority of attorneys that are in our program don't speak Spanish,
Mhm.
and the only prerequisite or the only requirement to join our program is having some bilingual staff, namely intake. Even if intake is third party or outsourced to an extent, that'll be more than sufficient. What we found is that, let's say there is a Spanish speaking consumer, let's say you own an injury firm in Chicago, someone who speaks Spanish speaks to your bilingual intake team, it ends up being a case, and you want to invite that person to your office or have a Zoom call or a phone call with that client that now signed that retainer agreement with you. What we find is that more often than not, that person will bring someone who speaks English with them to that meeting, and it's almost like cultural at this point. Like we don't yet know why that's the case. We just know that that's more than likely the case. Now, if you have someone that specifically manages cases in house, uh, that could be an attorney, or maybe it could be a case manager or receptionist, or anyone that works in the staff administratively who speaks Spanish. That person will end up being the de facto point of contact for that Spanish speaking client. It's so what we find is that no matter what your capabilities are, that client is, if they really want to work with you and if they really trust, the history of the firm and your prior successes, they're going to figure out a way to work within your firm.
I love it that you brought up the word trust. And when I think about trust, here's something that I'm sure some people who are watching this, listening to this, are thinking about. I, law firm owner, don't speak Spanish. Most of my
Yeah.
staff doesn't speak Spanish, but I'm running ads in Spanish.
Yeah.
When they call my firm, even if I have an intake specialist who speaks English, whether they're outsourced or in-house,
Mhm.
even if I do have support staff that speak Spanish, but I don't, I feel like there is a little bit of breakdown in the trust because my ad was in Spanish, but
Sure.
here I am, non-Spanish speaker. How does that reconcile in real life?
You got to just be honest in your advertising. So
How,
if you
how do you
have
do
a
that?
yeah, if you have a Spanish speaking attorney, why not promote it? Have them on camera, have them
But what if
speak
you
on
don't?
camera. And but if you don't, what we promote is a bilingual staff. So
Ah,
that's what's key here. It's like you have to set the expectation that no matter what, for those watching this ad in Spanish, there's a promise made that if you call in, someone is going to answer that phone in Spanish for you. We work to the extent where phone menus or IVRs are completely eliminated from the campaigns that we run because we
really?
want that we want the Hispanic consumer to call in and immediately talk to someone who's going to answer on behalf of the firm in Spanish. So we can make that promise. And as long as the attorneys work with us on that promise and that there's a commitment to that promise that what we advertise is what the consumer will experience, there will be no breakdown of trust. The last thing that we want to do is put an attorney on camera trying to sort of figure out their way to speak Spanish. We don't want to do that. We don't want to pretend that anyone speaks Spanish if they don't speak fluently. We want to be very honest. Either we're promoting a Spanish speaking attorney, of which there are very few, or we're more than likely promoting the bilingual staff.
Yeah, when you said that you do not want to put up an attorney who doesn't speak Spanish but try to speak Spanish, what came to my memory 3 or 4 years ago, Joe Biden going up on the stage to speak in front of Spanish-speaking community,
Yeah.
and what does he do? He plays Despacito by Justin Bieber.
Yeah. Bonkers. Yeah.
Bonkers.
Yeah.
So these are absolutely great insights. What I love, what you just said, that's absolutely applicable or should be applicable to all law firms. Get rid of your automated attendant. Like get rid of your automated phone's answering system. Just don't.
Oh, kill it. I think there was a call rail stat. Don't quote me on this. I'll find it. That said that if a Spanish speaker calls into any organization and they answer in English, up to 60% of the
Got it.
calls will be hung up on, which is
That's
a crazy statistic. And
no, but it makes
so
sense.
we also hear these IVRs that have these like long intros for the firm, like, thank you for calling the Love It firm. Please press one if you have an existing case for us. Please press two if you'd rather speak to us in Spanish. And all I'm thinking of is, what if the person doesn't speak Spanish? They're going to hear that whole intro, not know anything, not know what to do. They may have already hung up by the time that second option was presented to them. So we're really insistent on cutting out any layers of resistance. We
Hmm.
want the consumer to talk to the attorney immediately, or rather the firm immediately, because of the competitive nature. We're running ads on Google and LSA. There's some SEO benefits. There's Facebook, YouTube. No matter what, though, if someone's online, they're going to be presented with options. So we want to make sure that the consumer gets in touch with the firm immediately so that they don't feel the need to want to shop around more.
Absolutely. So when people call your firm, this is the moment that they stepped into a sales process with your law firm. You call it intake. The rest of the world calls it sales.
Yeah.
You want to remove every possible friction point that you have in the sales process. If your competitor answers the phone when they called, and if your automated system or IVR answered the phone when they called your firm, your competitor gets a little plus and you get a
Yeah.
little minus because you just created friction that puts you at a competitive disadvantage. It's not worth the savings of not having a real human being answer the
Yeah.
phone.
And nailed it. Yeah. And so we don't see any different behaviors between English or Spanish speaking markets. It's speed to contact
Hmm.
in a highly competitive online world that reigns over anything. You could have the best creative, you could have the best CRMs, and you could have the best telephony. If you're not answering the calls immediately or doing outbound calls immediately, you've lost half the battle.
Yeah, 100%. Here's what I also found curious about your consultancy, and that is your focus is on advertising
Mhm.
and not other services. And I get why that is, but I want other people to understand why advertising is first for Spanish speaking consumers.
Yeah, so generally when we talk to attorneys, they're looking for business above and beyond what they're doing. It's pretty rare that we talk to an attorney who has zero experience in marketing or advertising. Generally speaking, we talk to an attorney who has this trajectory. They've done, between 100,000 to a million in revenue. They believe that the English market is saturated, which is 90% of the time fairly accurate. And what they know is that they need to do something different, and they're exploring different options. So when they speak to us, they know that there is potential just based on the growing Hispanic population. It's ambiguous to them. They just know that it's sort of like a North Star that they should be referring to. But at the same time, they're also reviewing other programs that are super video intensive. They're going after branding consulting firms. They're kind of thinking of different options than just the website and SEO run of the mill program that we're seeing so often in the agency space. So when we work with attorneys, they're oftentimes pretty aware that they're trying to do something different, that they need to do something different in an increasingly saturated English speaking place. So we tell attorneys, if you're looking for business right now, if you want to make the phones ring right now, there's a premium to that. You've got to pay the Googles and the Facebooks of the world. But if you pay the Googles and the Facebooks of the world, you may as well do it with another market. That way you get some added advantage of savings on media costs, namely because Spanish media is generally cheaper. So I think that's very attractive to attorneys who just want to find incremental volume fairly quickly without needing to wait 6 or 12 months. They understand that, okay, by advertising, even at a premium, it's going to play into their favor because they're going to see those direct phone calls.
Let me translate part of what Hugo just said in marketing speak, and that is running an advertising, whether on Google or on Facebook, for exact same keywords in English will cost you more than those very same keywords translated into Spanish. As in, you may pay $20 per click for employment lawyer versus, don't let me butcher it. How do you say it in Spanish?
Yeah, like what was the phrase?
Employment lawyer.
Oh yeah, abogado laboral. Yeah,
There you go. Right.
yeah,
So abogado laboral may cost you like 25% of what it costs you to get a click on employment lawyer.
that's correct. Yeah,
And because there is probably fewer competitors,
correct.
those prospects may actually convert at a higher rate. So the end result, you may be getting business that is the same average case value at a lower acquisition cost. So let's imagine that your average case value is 10 grand. And for an English speaking prospect, you may spend $1,500 or 15% on acquisition of that $10,000 case value. But with a Spanish speaking prospect client, you may be spending one quarter of it, or roughly $375, just because that cost per click is so much lower and it's less competitive. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, and it's less competitive because oftentimes many firms that try to advertise in Spanish, they simply translate what works for them in English and assume that that will work in Spanish, and it almost never does because
Why?
it's not a language exercise of what we're doing. It's a cultural exercise. For instance, in English, we never have content or copy or imagery or moving images that reference undocumented persons, for instance. But when we're advertising to Hispanic audiences, that can be a decisive. That could be something that drives a decision for someone who may or may not have legal documentation in the United States. If they've been into a car accident, or if they have some wage and hour issues, they may think that they can't talk to a firm because of their legal status. But if we can confidently promote that their data is held in confidence, that their legal status is in confidence, that we won't compromise they're standing in the United States, they may want to work with that firm. That's something that's almost never discussed in English marketing, generally speaking. So it's a very cultural angle. We take it more of as a cultural exercise than a translation exercise.
So let's call it what it is. You can shoot straight in Spanish,
Yeah,
but you have to be politically correct in English.
potentially. Yeah, I think there's just less folks who speak English that are sensitive to documentation status, right?
Sure.
And so I think it's more of an issue among the Hispanic community than on the averages versus that of the general market.
Here's how I think about it. So, for
Sure.
example, if one of our clients tasked us to advertise them and said, hey, translate our ads into Spanish,
Hmm.
this is something that my marketing company would not think of.
It maybe it depends. Again, it depends on the staff, right? There's a phenomenal book called Hispanic Market Power. It's by one of the leading multicultural marketers. His name is Isaac Mizrahi, and he speaks extensively about how agencies and marketing companies that don't really specialize in this, all they need to do is staff up to some extent. I would love to say that we have some secret sauce, that we have amazing algorithms and crazy technologies to hyper target Spanish speakers. It's not. It's our staff. Like, we hire bilingual marketers who know a tremendous amount of copywriting tactics that speak to different market segments of the Hispanic community. So it's really a result of staffing, I think.
Makes sense. There's one more thing that I wanted to add. I earlier asked why advertising works
Mm-hmm.
better for Hispanic community, and I think it is because of what you started with. It's a mobile first community, meaning many Spanish speakers, especially those who are not in the country for too long, this is their access to the internet. They do not have desktops. Desktops are kind of outdated. I'm a dinosaur, I have a desktop. They do not have laptops. Some of them may or may not have tablets, but this everybody's got. And here's the thing, when you're looking for a service provider on Google, as most people do,
Mm-hmm.
when you're going to search on mobile, it's going to take you time to get to organic search results.
Yeah.
And what I know about Hispanic market is that they're less inclined. I read studies about that a few years ago. They're
Mm-hmm.
less inclined to sit there and read different blog posts and figure things out on their own before reaching out to service providers. It is a different approach. So they're more likely to click on ads as they appear, as
Yeah.
long as the copy, what the ad says, resonates with them, rather than scroll and scroll and scroll, get to organic search results, read, and then make a decision. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah, I think so. I think this is especially true in English and Spanish among working class folks. Working class people are busy working, right? They don't have the luxury of research and development. And I think one of the more unique things in the Hispanic market as well is how impactful the quality of the creative is. I can speak to one particular case study where um, it was more of a high production video shoot for a personal injury firm here in California, where in English, the videos that we produced on this one shoot um, it had a lot to do with sort of poking fun at the mascots of the insurance companies, like the Limu Emu, the Liberty Emu. There's the Progressive Flow. There's also Jake from State Farm. We had a lot of fun working with this idea of making them like bad guys, these really likable insurance company people. We made them into bad guys in this English commercial, but we knew that wouldn't translate well in Spanish. What we knew, because these aren't like super well known avatars in the Hispanic community. So what we did was we staged on the same day. We staged a boxing match between the attorneys and let's call it general bad insurance guy and their at fault driver who didn't really care about the injuries that she was at fault for. And again, it was the same shoot, same concept. where we're trying to make a villain out of somebody, but we're contextualizing culture into that. And those videos are doing extremely well because what we did was we listened to the community. We had these ideas, we had these creative briefs, and we tested it online. We asked numerous survey companies to interview the general market, the Hispanic market, and give us feedback on what would work, what wouldn't work. And so we take culture super seriously because that is a needle mover. Taking culture into account is almost a business decision at this point if you want to go multicultural.
That makes sense. So, if you have any data on this, or maybe you could just give me an idea. A typical client, when they come to you, I assume that they're not doing any advertising to Hispanic market, or they're doing some and their performance is not great.
Yeah.
How much can their business grow by adding this to their marketing mix?
If you're in the top 10 growing states in the United States, that's California, New Mexico, Nevada, Florida, Jersey, New York, Illinois. And there's three other ones. If you're in the top, let's call it the top 10
Well,
trending states,
Illinois is not.
definitely.
I live here.
You
Well,
know,
maybe Spanish speaking, but not as a state overall.
oh, correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the top 10 states that make up, I believe, 60% of the U.S. Hispanic population.
Okay,
That,
makes
like
sense.
that's what you want to focus on. If you're in those top 10 states, you could presumably, if you're, let's say, you're an injury law attorney and you're producing anywhere between 10 and 30 cases a month, you could easily add another 10 to 30 cases a month within the next quarter if you just advertise to Spanish speakers.
Well, what was the starting base point?
If you're generating 10 to 30 cases per month,
You can
just
double it.
you can double that easily
In how long?
in a quarter.
What type of investment would be required to make that happen?
Depends on your area of law, depends on your metro area. For instance, like your acquisition costs in Houston will be different than those of Los Angeles or Sacramento or Las Vegas. So it can vary. We've seen acquisition costs in injury law range from 1,500 all the way to 4,500 for
How
your
does that
for your
translate into percentage of case value, if you know?
again, so that depends. For instance, we hear a lot of pushback on a $4,000 acquisition cost, but those are the areas of law that generate the geographic areas that are most likely to generate higher value cases like commercial trucking or wrongful death or TBIs. Again, I'm speaking more so towards personal injury mostly,
Yep.
but generally speaking, I think anyone in those top 10 states could triple their clientele within a quarter. And that's not an exaggeration. It's really a result of advertising, having the good creative, being in an uncompetitive space with certain keywords. If you're really committed to it on not just the marketing side, but also the support side, making sure that you have proper intake, that there's a proper client experience with translated documents in Spanish, you're going to crush it. And so that's what we try to look for when attorneys look for us. We want to make sure that it's a win-win for both of us. We want to make sure that they understand the work that we're doing, but that they're also committed to the client experience after the case is acquired.
I assume that you brought up this last point is because you're probably getting some pushback from some prospective clients and some existing clients on them just wanting to get those phone calls in, and they do not want to worry about the other component. But I think from what you said earlier,
Yeah.
having the right personnel to do intake in Spanish, it's not half the battle. It's like you don't need to start the battle if you don't have this component figured out. Is that correct?
Yeah, couldn't agree more with that. Yeah, because it affects everything. If you don't have the right staffing at the first point of contact, our work is sort of irrelevant. And we want to make sure that the whole client experience is defined before we even start a marketing campaign. That's not just phone menus, but that's just scripting. That's translation of documents, of invoicing, that whole experience from beginning to the end of that case being settled. We want to make sure that there's an agreed upon process, because otherwise we have no idea what we'll be able to advertise, what expectations we can advertise. We want to make sure that we know the whole experience before we can devise a campaign for it.
I'm going to ask you kind of sort of again this question because I think it's
Yeah.
very important for people who are listening to this. And a lot of people are too shy to call or email to ask this question. So, for the sake of people who might be like that, who may be watching this or listening to this,
Yeah.
what is a typical investment into hiring your consultancy to doing both? Creating advertising, managing campaigns, and actually helping me staff, because I know from your website you also do that, helping me staff with the right people to do intake in Spanish. Like on average, across the whole gamut of your customers, clients,
Mhm.
when we look at the 80%, the representative sample, what are they spending between what and what on monthly basis? And we can say that the ROI, as it should be, is somewhere between 400 and 700%, right? Somewhere in
Yes.
that
So
neighborhood.
we see up to a 7x return on
Super.
everything invested within our
Yep.
programs, and I think it's because the margins are higher with lower cost media. That has a big impact
We
on
see
your
that with
return.
we see that with English advertising as well. So that's like not
That's good.
super unique, but it can be done depending on where you are, depending on your
Correct.
practice area. But you can get like 4 to 7x. That's probably doable.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
super doable. And as far as average monthly advertising investment in personal injury, anyone should be spending at least $25,000 a month in personal injury to make a meaningful move in their
It's the
Spanish speaking
hard
market.
truth. It's the hard truth, right? So like
It's,
you're watching
it's
this, this
yeah,
guy knows what he's talking about. It's
yeah.
the
I
hard
mean,
truth.
I mean, it's not to say that we've not tried personal injury campaigns under 20. We have in the past. We just don't do them anymore because we want someone in our program to win. And we know that there's a premium to winning, you know?
Yeah.
So in personal injury, that's uniquely the number that we found across the major metros across the United States. Whereas in other practice areas, we've seen, folks in criminal defense, family law, bankruptcy, immigration, you name it. We don't start campaigns south of 5,000 a month
Yep.
because again we want a fair shot. We want the attorneys to experience some wins, and I think that's just going to be the number moving forward. Google is not shy about their position as not being auction based anymore. They are manipulating click prices. They are price setting, and it's now become well known. They know the P&Ls of all these legal firms and organizations. So they're going to create a marketplace for the numbers that they know about already. So we just know that generally speaking, if you're serious about any type of marketing online, you should be spending at least $5,000 to give it a fair shot a month for 3 to 6 months at minimum. But PI, you have to put up 25K a month. You got to try it out for 3 to 6 months plus. If you don't have that type of investment available, I wouldn't do it. There's other ways to generate business. Kill it in your referral community. Kill it in your actual community. You know, be a be an influencer. We've seen attorneys do extremely well selling their personalities on Instagram, and they don't spend any dollars on advertising. So there's other mediums. All I'm trying to defend is the position that if you want incremental business right now, it does in injury law rather. It's uniquely at $25,000 a month.
Makes perfect sense. What does it cost to have your team work on all of this on average?
On average, again, depends so many variables here.
Sure.
Um, you know, uh, we have programs where your entry fees are as low as 6-7K. When we're talking about exclusives, those are well into the six figures and on an annual basis. So depends on geographic areas, depends on practice areas, a lot of variables there. But generally speaking, we're trying to work with firms that are more growth minded, that are a little more sophisticated, that generally have the appetite for growth.
Makes perfect sense. I'm so glad that you're not terribly shy about talking about these numbers because people need to understand it. And I keep on pounding this message year after year that nothing fails as consistently in the business world as cheap marketing. You
Yeah,
want to waste some money, you go hire somebody cheap.
absolutely.
And it's incredibly expensive to have somebody cheap working for you on your marketing.
It's true. I
Well,
mean, there's that adage: you do get what you pay for. You see that in every service and good.
but
You know.
but with marketing, it's actually a lot worse than that. And here's why: when you hire somebody cheap, $1,000 a month, $1,500 a month, the problem is not how much money you're spending with them. The problem is how much money you're not making.
Yeah.
You could be hiring someone who's 4 times more expensive, but in reality are free because they're producing so much more revenue for you. Versus someone who's very cheap, working from a spare bedroom, potentially just has a small shop and they barely know what they're doing. And the truth of the matter is that $1,500 a month gets you about this many hours on a monthly basis.
Yeah.
And when you go against a powerhouse that charges six, seven, $10,000 a month, this much of labor versus this much of labor, that team will always win. And
It's
if
very
your
true.
competitors hire this team and you get this team, devastating effect, especially when you look at multi-year investment.
Oh yeah, it's one of the bigger I mean, you've seen this all the time, where you
All the
onboard
time.
an attorney and you look at a broken car and you realize you can't even fix the car. You had to buy a new car, and it's a common thing that happens when we see this a lot when attorneys work with a local consultant, if you will, like who works down the street, build some websites. That person will work with someone overseas where there's no accountability. There's no checks and balances on who's changing what on your website, and then you hire your niece to do some social media management. The passwords are forgotten. I mean, these are very common stories, and it's the price. It's the real price you pay when you go
Yep.
cheap. And
Yep.
so, yeah, it's a warning sign. I think at the end of the day, you want to work with an organization in the United States, legal organization that has some kind of like competitive advantage. I know you have one in your space. We have ours in the Hispanic community. It's all about understanding the value of what that legal marketer brings to the table, I think, and not just so much being focused on pricing, because it's really short sighted, I think.
Yeah. And so here's what Hugo's team brings to the table. Once again, I'm just going to recap. If you have a decent case flow now, 10, 20, 30 cases a month, you can probably double it within a quarter or two by expanding into the Hispanic market with advertising through Google and other mainstream platforms like Facebook, Instagram, etc., depending on what your main practice area is. You should be expecting a reasonable return on investment of 4 to 7 times of what you put in, as long as your base investment is reasonable. And when I say reasonable, this is a fuel to your vehicle. If you want to go from Chicago to LA, roughly 2,800 miles, you just cannot, and you run like a regular gasoline powered car. You can't say 10 gallons is good enough.
Right.
It ain't good. It's gonna get you to Nebraska. That's
Yeah.
where your journey
Yeah.
is going to end. So when it
Yeah.
comes to advertising, that budget is the fuel that your vehicle needs to get to where you want to go. Can't fund it with 10 gallons of fuel and say I'm going to LA. So Hugo, great, great insights. Abogadosnow.com, great website. Check out the FAQ section. It's going to fill in whatever gaps I left open here in this podcast. Hugo, people can connect with you. I assume on LinkedIn. I have it open.
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. You can search for Abogados Now or my name, Hugo E. Gomez, on LinkedIn. You could also email me directly, hugo@abogadosnow.com. That's my direct email. Happy to set up a meeting if you ever want to meet over Zoom or in person. I'm based in Los Angeles. But yeah, it was great talking to you, Sasha. Great questions.
Likewise. Thank you, sir.
Appreciate it.